Hello everyone, this is part 6 of What If Naruto Was a Scientist Like Orochimaru, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
A year and 2 months later. Konoha Graveyard. Konoha no Sato. Silver Senbon launchers glinted on the ground, and right next to them was a black backpack under a neatly folded grey and red short-sleeved hoodie. There was also a fox Anbu mask that was made into a full-headed ski mask to cover the user's hair. 10 feet away from the items, a person shrouded by darkness stood and looked down at a freshly dug grave. In his right hand was a shovel that stuck out of the ground. The moon flitted over into the clearing to reveal that the person had thin blonde and a face so pale it almost shone under the moonlight. He was in ankle-length black pants and a short-sleeved grey shirt that had a thick black stripe going down from the neck to the bottom. His uncombed blonde hair shifted a little under the breeze to reveal 4 dots on his forehead, going a little further down to show he had 2 dots on each side of the bridge of his nose. A pair of black goggles hung on his neck as his vulpine red and black eyes looked down at the grave he dug. His face was clean of any visible emotion. Human life was very fragile. He now finally understood the pain of loss. He now understood the reason why the Konoha ninjas were so appalled to hear of his shadow activities and why they had initially been adamant to bring him to justice. It wasn't that he didn't know that kidnapping and murdering were evil, but rather he had only seen it from the selfish businessman's point of view. He was ending a life to make profit and to better understand the human anatomy. It was a selfish reality now, realizing that all the years he had spent breaking families, even though they were mostly unrecognized members of the society. Naruto swallowed slightly as he looked up from the grave to the headstone he had crafted by himself. A smooth rectangle with twin snakes winding up the sides. The name written on it was Orochimaru of the Sannin. Under the neat name was cursive writing, an epitaph, which read, "Only time will tell how we are remembered," with the symbol for the snake and spider clan chiseled in. The woman had insisted that when she was finally gone that he shouldn't cry, but he couldn't help but a few stray tears slip out of his eyes. He wasn't going to experiment on anyone anymore. Not unless he had to do it. The 14-and-a-half-year-old boy cracked his neck and grits his teeth as he looked at the graves in the main graveyard. The notable ones were the 4 that sat before the multitude behind them. To the far right, his father's name glowed a little under the moon. Even though she had requested to be buried next to him, it was as close as he could get without Konoha raising alarms. Naruto turned around and without looking he sealed the shovel into his left bicep as he began putting on his hoodie. He fixed on his goggles and slipped the fox mask over his head. He looked over his shoulder at the grave as he clipped his launchers onto his forearms. He commanded a small senbon to push out a little from one of the 5 nozzles. He pricked his finger and muttered, "Summoning jutsu, smoke spider snakes." A puff in front of him and 5 grey snakes and 5 spiders appeared. "Protect her with your lives," he said to them, and they mutely nodded as they melted into the ground around the grave. He began walking forward as he whipped out a curved black forearm protector and pushed it onto his left silver launcher. It clicked to show that it was securely on, and he did so with the other launcher so that only a single small silver nozzle poked out a little. The blonde boy turned to the grave one last time and bowed to his godmother before his whole body scattered into hundreds of spiders, skittering quickly into the cover of the darkness of the woods that surrounded the lone grave. Oh. The sound of a horse galloping through the grassy plains of Grass Country's countryside could be heard. The rider squinted her eyes as the wind whipped around her. She was a black-haired lady with a delicate yet firm beauty. She wore a blaringly white short-sleeved midriff shirt with a long-sleeved mesh armor shirt underneath. She also had black knee-length shorts and white tights underneath that. Wrapped around her right upper bicep was a red cloth with a black kanji for spider written on it. There was a silver and wooden bow that was crossed over her body with a full quiver of arrows strapped onto her back, and the last notable thing she had was a sheathed katana strapped to her hip. The grassy plain seemed to never end before she saw who she had been looking for lying on his back with a gleaming long sword jammed into the ground next to his head, his backpack lying next to his right leg. He had his fingers weaved together over his belly and a straw in his lips. His red eyes looked on as her horse screeched to a halt. "Whoa!" she shouted and pulled back the reins. The horse cantered forward shortly before he stopped. The lady leaped off her horse swiftly and rushed towards her boss, Naruto. She slid on her tights protected knees on the soft, lush grass and came to a stop beside him. I'm fine, he said quickly just as she grabbed his face and looked over him critically. I'm fine, Aoki-chan, he said as he patted her hand as he sat up. Nice horse, he muttered to her as he looked at the white horse she had been riding on. Kimimaro-san was kind enough to give him to me as a parting gift, she said as she sat down beside him. They were silent for a few minutes before she spoke again. I missed you. Speaking with a blood clone wasn't as good as speaking to the real person anyways. The corners of his lips quirked up slightly at that and he replied, I missed you too. So where now? They were both rogue warriors and they were both cast off from their families, orphans who had no place to call home. The boy shrugged and looked at the fox mask in his hands, his goggles was around his neck again, and said, I don't know. Mara-chan and I were everywhere but not at the same time. What do you mean? We went to every country on the continent but we couldn't stay long because she had little time left. I want to experience these places again, nice or not. He looked at her and smiled widely with his eyes closed, his serrated teeth flashed a little under the sun. I want to have an adventure. And I will be by your side through them all, she said as she hit her left chest her right fist and held it there for half a minute. There was a part of her that Naruto openly referred to her as her samurai half, where they would keep their oaths and pledges to the death, even if it went against their sense of morality and pride. She had pledged her life to him a long while ago and he was sure she had forgotten about it but apparently she hadn't. Though what she had with Naruto, her relationship with him, was special on a whole new level. Before he had gone with Orochimaru they were akin to best friends. She didn't need to have a reason to protect him with her life, but the fact that he cared for her when she was at her lowest was reason enough, even though he had initially threatened to watch her die if she didn't come to work for her. Excellent, but I have to warn you about something, he said as he got up and put his mask into his bag. He pulled out the kusanagi, a weapon Orochimaru had passed on to him, and, like magic, he pushed it into his bag but it didn't tear when the handle disappeared inside. The young lady watched him in her kneeling position as he shouldered his bag on and adjusted his goggles over his eyes. Yes, we are both wanted by the various laws of our countries but, with all due respect, I'm more wanted. She furrowed her eyebrows and cocked her head to the side in confusion. She was the highest-ranking Ronin from Iron Country with the highest bounty. If anything her boss should be just a little bit above her on the wanted radar, he continued. Mara-chan told me that my tailed beast, Kyubi no Kitsune, is being sought after by an S-rank rogue organization called the Akatsuki for some crazy takeover the world plan. The point is, we may be randomly attacked by S-rank ninja in red clouds. Are you ready to handle that with me? She stood up and nodded, until my dying breath, Naruto. He smiled slightly and raised his right fist to her, she bumped it and they both nodded. As her boss was traveling around with his family relative she had not been idle. She had made sure that her swordsmanship was as sharp as ever as well as practiced extensively with her bow. She occasionally went on missions with Oto Ninja, with the hope that she would cross by Naruto, as well as to make money outside of the KDC. The other thing she had been doing was traveling alone to the branches of the KDC within reach to make sure things were still running smoothly after their CEO's true identity had been revealed to the continent. Most of the workers in the warehouse branches in Iwa and Kumo had quit after hearing that Naruto was the son of the Yondaime and the bloody Uzumaki princess. She acted in his stead, by his request, and made sure that when all the noise of his identity had cooled down they were never rehired. The identity didn't shake too much foundation off Naruto's connections with the underworld seeing as he had made a great first impression with them and his influence had only increased exponentially. Now, Naruto was on the S-rank section of the Iwagakure bingo book, considering his skills and his organization. Iwa were adamant to have his KDC uprooted and burnt to ashes but some of the citizens of Earth Country thought differently and still patronized him merely for his products. Aoki-chan, who had personal control over the Kitsugami money storage, had spread her boss influence wherever she went by helping to fund various legal and illegal shops. Naruto knew of all she had been doing with respect to his company, since she had been communicating with his spider summons, and he approved. It was always nice to have influence in various countries, whether it was small or large. They walked back to the pathway that led directly to Grass Village, in Grass Country, and, strangely enough, he slapped the horse's butt, frightening the creature and they watched it gallop into the distance. He smiled at his friend. It's healthier to walk. She shrugged and walked beside him down the path until he abruptly stopped as the wind picked up. Aoki-chan quickly unsheathed her katana and sparks fell down as it clashed against a tri-pronged scythe. The thrown weapon was pulled back, showing that it had a chain connected to it, and returned to the hand of the maniacal Jashinist. Kakuzu looked at him from beside his partner, both of their Akatsuki cloaks fluttered in the wind, which had slowed down a little. Guess we caught up to these little shitheads in time, huh? Kakuzu, hidden tittered as a crazy laugh escaped his lips. I thought Leader Sama said they were meant to be dangerous. They are, Kakuzu muttered under his breath to himself. He knew little to nothing about both of them, this included their skills, abilities or even jutsu list. Even though Pain trusted them to be able to rush headfirst into the darkness when it came to fighting mysterious opponents, fully trusting their immortality, he was a little cautious to face them. His reason. Aoki-chan had been personally trained by one of the strongest samurai in Iron Country history and had been appointed by this samurai to become the next leader of Iron Country, making her one of the strongest samurai in history as well, which was no small feat. He could only assume that she wasn't placed as an S-rank Ronin because of some sense of loyalty the new leader of Iron Country had to her. This information alone had cost him an arm, a leg and a kidney to retain. House servants of the ruling samurai family were very tight-lipped. Uzumaki Naruto, though, had been personally trained by the mad, rogue Snake Sanin herself, who just so happened to be his godmother, and even before that he had been a highly ranked and much sought-after ninja in Konoha. As a shinobi of the leaf he had made a name for himself as an unbeatable opponent, whether it came to missions or battles. Outside of Konoha, as a rogue ninja, he had been sighted traveling with Orochimaru, being challenged by various ninja and being summarily destroyed at his hands. Make no mistake, Kakuzu, the man that had faced off against the Shodaime Hokage lived, was not afraid of these teenagers, rather he was thinking of how his reputation would be boosted when the world learnt that he, and Hidden, were the first people, to ever defeat them in combat. He subtly began to prepare to release his masks as Naruto remained unafraid. Aoki-chan had her lethally sharp sword crossed over her chest and the sheath in a reverse grip in her left hand. The spider summoner took both of them in and grinned. Well, look who we have here. I actually thought Kisame and Itachi were the ones coming for me. Sorry to disappoint you, but they were busy with our assignment, Kakuzu said. Pain had anticipated that Orochimaru would have told Naruto of his capture team, so he merely switched the responsibilities. Itachi and Kisame were in Waterfall to capture the 7 tails while Kakuzu and Hidden were to capture the 9 tails. The zombie brothers didn't care who they had to capture, they were both in it for some sort of glory. Hidden wanted the glory from the battle and Kakuzu wanted the money from Naruto's extremely well sought after silver Senbon launches, Spider Summon and his goggles, those alone totaled to about 3 million Ru. And who the fuck do you think you are to not expect us, Chicken D? Hidden yelled. Naruto slightly glared at the priest but looked back at Kakuzu. I want to know how I'll fare against an opponent and you will be the perfect training dummy. His long senbon jutted out of his launches and he got into his stance. He wanted to use his default number of legs first before he adjusted based on how difficult they were. You two won't be leaving here alive. You can try, Kakuzu said with an amused snort. Take Hidden, I'll have Kakuzu. Don't let him cut you, understood? Yes sir, she replied. Both of them blazed over towards their targets and the zombie brothers too ran full tilt towards the 2 other missing ninjas. Oh. Life used to be easier when it was just them. They didn't have to worry about anything other than accomplishing the goal. That was before he came into the picture. This was the thought of Kabuto Yakushi as he looked at a picture of him and his former mistress, Orochimaru of the Sannin. The woman was holding a clipboard and she was using her pen to poke a dark green mutated Venus flytrap, while he was sending a discreet thumb up as he watched her. All they ever spoke about was on reaching her ambition and he didn't mind because he was totally devoted to her, but then her godson entered her mind and she changed. She started lessening how she experimented on people, she was now only mildly cold to everyone and her bloodlust reduced fractionally. When Naruto had graduated out of the academy and became a special Junin, straight away she had dropped their original ambition and started reading books on how to be a proper role model and parent. He assumed it was to Naruto. She had purposely disregarded her own health to increase the skills of her godson. They had been searching for a way to kill her cancer and grant her immortality, then she stopped to take care of her independent godson. He couldn't go against his mistress, so he went with it, but when her cancer had taken over half of her heart he interjected, for a brief moment, and begged her to be selfish once again. The woman had only looked him in the eyes with so much hate and disgust he had sealed his mouth shut and continued his role as her assistant. The silver-haired, bespectacled man swirled the contents of a beaker gently, its purplish-green contents moved thinly inside before he added a small drop of a toxic green chemical into the beaker. It turned into a scaly yellow. He paused briefly to stare at what he had created with the resources her damn godson had gifted him after her death, more than half of the chemicals and mixtures that his mistress had done which he had done as well. He frowned deeply as he kept looking into the gently bubbling mixture before he tilted it into his mouth, his mind already set and his new goal in place. Kabuto grunted deeply and hunched over, grabbing his stomach in pain as the mixture burned a path through his body. His Kekai Genkai fixed him up just as his body was destroyed again. He fell on his knees and yelled in a deep, demonic voice as white scales slowly crept up his body from the very tips of his feet to his head. His canines lengthened and sharpened and his eyes turned midnight black before they seemed to contract together into a tight dot and then they too lengthened into sharp black reptilian pupils. His fingers and toes turned into short but sharp claws as a long, scaly tail grew out from his tailbone. He panted as he dragged his weak body on the ground towards a cabinet. He punched his fist through the wood and grabbed a shiny silver tray. As his eyes cleared and he got a good, clear look at the snake-like monster he had become, a maniacal laugh escaped his lips. Zetsu watched on, his head slowly coming out from the ceiling, as the medic ninja lost his soul to his inner darkness. This wasn't going as well as he thought. Kakuzu moved away from a senbon jab, his Akatsuki robes in tatters and with various cuts all over his body, and kicked the offending arm, but the person pulled it back in time and the older ninja had to raise his left forearm to block a ground-shattering heel kick from Naruto. The boy pulled away and allowed his senbon to slide back into their launches as he punched Kakuzu's side. The man grunted and used his left shin to block the attack. Then Naruto showed him that he was indeed the son of the Yondaime Hokage, the Yellow Flash. The series of blows to his chest pushed the man back. He lost count after 50 and with a last dexterous spinning kick he was nailed across his face. It was like he was watching himself being beaten up, but at the same time he felt the pain, and for the first time in his life he was unable to keep up with his opponent. He hadn't used his masks yet, he had underestimated the blonde brat, but the worst part was that Naruto had not used any jutsu. He was being destroyed by a 14-year-old boy with just taijutsu. His pride couldn't take it. "You will watch me rip your heart out," he said audibly, and Naruto beamed at him, not too winded or strained from the speed he had used, though steam puffed out of his mouth a little. "So you're finally going to take me serious, huh?" the boy said as he rubbed his red-gloved hands together. I was starting to feel bad for not going all out too. "Stupid brat, you're only making your death even more painful at my hands. If I had a rue for every time someone told me that, I'd have 3 rue." He watched as the man threw off his Akatsuki robe and 5 masks popped off his back with thick black tendrils following as well to form different-looking humanoid creatures. He was glad that Kakuzu at least wrote the kanji for each affinity on the forehead of each mask. It would make it easier. "Oh, I'm going to have so much fun reproducing your Earth Grudge Fear Kekai Genkai. I wonder what will happen if I give your carcass to Papa Snake Sage to eat," he wondered aloud. Kakuzu looked like he had enough of the boy undermining him. He charged with all of his masks honing at Naruto. The young Junin leaped over the fire mask, bounced off the lightning mask but dispelled into a cluster of spiders when he was hit in the middle of his back by black strings courtesy of the irate Kakuzu. The spiders scampered away and converged 12 feet away from the man and his masks. Naruto reformed completely and he looked amused. He had been taught to never be overconfident, but he had also been taught that the moment his opponent lost composure he had lost the battle. The best way to go about this was by prodding him with words. Kakuzu looked like he was almost at the point he desired, but he had enough of talking. He slapped his palms together and black shadows circled his eyes. Inside him Kyubi watched, mildly excited for what was coming, as a mass of the boy's blue chakra spun within itself right before his eyes and abruptly stopped. Before it divided itself into 5 parts, each one a different color symbolizing their affinity. It was a trick Orochimaru had helped him perfect, where he had to have his chakra at the ready, like he was about to perform a jutsu. The ground around him cracked and he pointed at Kakuzu, and made a "come at me" motion with the hand. If Hiden was facing any other ninja, even a high Junin, with a kunai, a tanto or even a katana, he would have been faring better than now, but he was matched up against a female ronin that was wielding the same sword that was created just for her. He didn't let it keep him down though. He swung his scythe wildly and the Ronin clanged her sheath against the weapon, shocking him that it held strong, before she kicked his midsection with her soul. She slid aside from a downward slice and bent under a kick the man had sent at her. He looked like he had jumped headfirst into a blender. The upper half of his robe was gone to reveal his black sleeveless vest and there were chunks of his arm that were missing, like they had been sliced off cleanly. Aoki-chan raised her sword to block another downward hack, grunting a little as the crazy priest kept on bringing down the weapon whilst laughing insanely. "Stay still and taste of my blade, bitch," he said with wide eyes and a massive grin. She pursed her lips in silent irritation as she spun aside from a wild swing, jabbed her sheath at his neck, which painfully pushed his Adam's apple far inside. He pulled away from her and grabbed his throat. Short tittering cackles escaped his lips as he tried to push away the discomfort from the seemingly lax attack. The girl watched him cough out blood with half-lidded eyes, but shocking enough he lunged at her. She merely raised her legendary sword and it impaled the airborne man clean through his stomach. He gasped in surprise and coughed more blood as she smacked the side of his head with her hard sheath. She then kicked her right leg and it smashed against his side, which he released when his hands broke under the attack. "I wonder why you're an S rank," she said with her eyebrows furrowed, watching as his body slowly healed. "It's probably because you're immortal." "Watch what you fucking say, you piss-ass skank, or I will shove my D so far up you pansy ass you'll be able to taste it," he growled. Lightning pull, she clenched the fist that was holding the sword, that was in turn holding the man up, and tendrils of electricity erupted from the handle and covered them. He yelled as lightning licked his body and his muscles tightened up painfully, so much that he was immobile. She relaxed her hand and the electricity sputtered to a stop. "You bitch," he said in a low voice, "when I get my hands on you, I'll chop your fucking limbs off, and fuck you till you die." "Such bad language," she tutted quietly. "You should be glad it isn't Naruto you're fighting or you will suffer worse pains than death." "Oh yeah? You're D-sucking samurai piece of shit, guess it's good I can't die." "You can say that," she said with a small smile. Wind push. She clenched her hand again and the Jashinist's stomach began swelling up, his ribs broke and his lungs swelled up as well, then his arms and legs before. Pop. He exploded all around, blood and body parts scattered everywhere. The girl ignored the blood on her formerly immaculate white shirt and tights as she walked forward to where the man's head had landed. "You shit-brained bitch." Before he could finish with his yell she jammed her sword through his mouth, cutting off his tongue so that it rolled into the back of his mouth and exited from his neck. He gurgled as blood and spit pumped from his mouth and onto her sword, but she merely looked at him before she looked at her master. The blonde scientist was hopping away from multiple balls of water being fired off from the water mask's mouth while he engaged Kakuzu in a full-on taijutsu fight. He snaked away from a grab for his throat and his left leg went up to hit his opponent, but Kakuzu grabbed the leg in his grip and threw Naruto towards his fire mask. Fire release. Dragon fire technique. The mask opened its mouth wide and a flaming red dragon spun out and screamed towards Naruto. The boy flashed through 10 hand seals, water release, water spider web. He spread his hands after the last hand seal and hundreds of thin water strings connected to his hands. He pushed them towards the dragon and on contact steam erupted all over them. Kakuzu could hear fighting going on inside the thick steam. Fireballs shot from inside in different directions before a sharp snap and a short sizzle before silence. The man smirked a little under his mask. That boy wasn't so tough. I knew he was all talk. He furrowed his eyebrows when he heard a fast whirring sound. The man swiftly caught the thrown mask that would have cleaved off his head, but that was the beginning of his loss. The mask exploded into toxic green smoke and he could feel his skin burn off his bones painfully slowly. The man stifled the pained grunt that racked through him as black thread sprouted out from every sewn-shut part of his body. His arms reached the ground and spun around in a windmill to blow away the same smoke that would have ended any other normal ninja. That was when he saw Naruto jump out from wherever he had been and drove his knee straight into the face of his defensive mask, his earth mask. On contact it shattered and the boy grabbed the shards of wood, throwing them at the water mask before he flickered out of sight just as the earth mask shards were dodged by the water mask. It was silent and Kakuzu panted a little, trying to heal himself from the body-burning smoke he had been distracted with. That was until there was a distinct slicing sound. He looked behind him at his lightning mask and it had been cleaved cleanly in half by the legendary grass cutter sword with Naruto grasping it in both of his hands. Kakuzu sent over waves of black threads from his arms and his mouth at him, but when they reached the boy, again, exploded into hundreds of spiders and these spiders disappeared in puffs of smoke. It was when the wind blowing through the gassy plane had increased violently and the laughter that floated through was Aoki-chan, who still had the silently cursing priest jammed on her sword, grateful she did not intervene with her boss fight. Back when they were still in Konoha, Naruto had explained to her something that happened to every Uzumaki in history the moment they had unlocked their chakra. When they were in a fight or battle they considered exciting, something known as the infamous Uzumaki battle lust would fall on them. It was a time the Uzumaki, no matter how small percentage he or she was, would see no other thing but the person he was fighting. Any attempt to hold him down would result in either death or critical maiming, but only if the Uzumaki that had fallen into this was stronger. The only way for an Uzumaki to explain this was by saying that there was a click in his brain and he was under the battle lust until his opponent was dead or the Uzumaki had broken every bone in his body. This battle lust could be controlled and channeled into the user's actions and even his or her speech, but if the excitement or hate for the opponent had gotten too strong, then it was always best to step out of the way and watch the carnage. This didn't have to do with only the increase of adrenaline in the body but on the person's genuine desire to hurt his opponent or opponents. The very first time Uzumaki Kushina had fallen under her battle lust was when she was a genin in her very first Chunin exam, which was remarkable since she unlocked her chakra a little while before she entered the academy. She had been pitted against a female marsh village taijutsu specialist and she had been ground into a pulp, but before that could happen she had broken both of her arms and legs fighting back. Naruto had said that he was fully capable of controlling his battle lust and she knew that, though there were times he allowed it to slip out in a fight. She had witnessed his battle lust only once and it was during their first and only spar, so far. That day she was actually afraid that her trusty katana blade would shatter under his continued onslaught. He had only stopped when she was too exhausted to continue. His goggles were off and she could see as the light red sheen moved off his eyes and he was back to normal, or as normal as Naruto could get. Right now though, Naruto was bloodthirsty and that meant that he was in his battle lust. The boy flickered into sight right in front of Kakuzu, slashed him across his chest with the kusanagi and flickered away, appeared right behind him, sliced again and disappeared. The man's reaction time had been severely stunted by the corrosive smoke that still slowly ate away his body. The only thing keeping him together were his black strings and he wasn't even sure how long they would hold up. He grunted and blood spewed from his mouth as Naruto slashed him behind his neck, not deep enough to cut his spine but deep enough to seriously hurt him. It was like watching him teleport all over the man as he systematically began to break and cut him. A foot met his back and a sharp crack indicated that his spine had shattered. He wildly swung his arms but Naruto had already gone. A punch to his left cheek broke that side of his face. He growled and swung again. This time Naruto didn't flicker away. He grabbed the arm and stepped on Kakuzu's ribs, pushing his leg away until the arm tore off the green-eyed man's socket. This action also thrust the injured man away. He dropped the twitching arm and idly twirled the legendary sword as he walked to Kakuzu. The man was dragging himself away from Naruto, the shadows under the boy's eyes now stretched down over his cheeks to his chin in a line and he could just barely see blue chakra over Naruto's body. The boy smirked slightly at him and placed the tip of the poisonous sword on his prey's neck. Without hesitating he pushed it clean through, ignoring the thread that wiggled and thrashed over his sword. He pushed in again and nailed the man down by his neck into the ground, but Kakuzu still struggled, too weak and eaten up by acid to move. Naruto knelt down on one knee and smiled at the man. He poked his forehead as the thin sheen of red blood left his eyes, which were under his goggles, and said, "What was that about taking my heart?" The black thread wasn't moving again besides the small twitches, but the man glared at him in defiance, his whole face bloody and his body broken. "A sword through your jugular and you're still not dead? I have to say, that's very impressive." He sat down with his legs crossed next to the dying man and continued, "I'm going to use you as my message to your comrades." His eyes trailed to the ring on his finger, "and I think I know how to send it." Oh. Tsunade couldn't believe what she was about to say, but why the hell did the KDC shut down? It had been a year and two since the only workers of the drug empire in their custody were broken out of their cells by unknown ninjas. As the Hokage, she wasn't supposed to condone any sort of criminal act in Konoha. She was supposed to be happy that the Rogue Ninjas Corporation had been closed down, but she wasn't. For months now she had been looking the other way as doctors in Konoha's hospital and clinics desperately ordered legal drugs that were in rare supply all over the continent but were apparently grown in wherever the KDC operated. And she had also signed some agreements for the KDC to supply them with the special painkillers, chakra replenishing pills, blood replenishing pills, muscle knitting spray, bone setting technology, sleep medication, and a whole bunch of other stuff that Naruto had created himself. These drugs reduced the mortality rate of both the civilians and the ninja. They were organic and non-addictive, unlike their illegal counterparts, as well as affordable. They didn't pose any sort of threat to them in any way. She had examined each and every type of drug. She had even looked the other way when the KDC began getting more confident in their operations and showing up in the day to deliver their ordered drugs and medical equipment to Konoha. Then why the hell did they so suddenly shut down? It could either be they had decided to hide or they were really gone. Jiraiya had reported that he couldn't help himself. He had investigated and located a branch warehouse in Hidden Chill. He admitted that there was a little scuffle between him and the 3-rank missing ninja that protected the warehouse. He subdued him easily enough, but when he had finally gained entry into the warehouse by bypassing the level 8 seals surrounding the premises, the whole place was empty, not even a single magnifying glass or a measly crumb left behind. He had wanted to interrogate the ninja he had captured, but they too were gone. He could be the reason the KDC had shut down. The slug Sanin squeezed her pen and smashed her fist down on her desk. The pen stabbed in and jutted from the wooden desk as she tried to get her mind back on track. If her teammate had really been the reason Naruto had either shut down his corporation or cut off ties with Konoha, then she would make sure she squeezed the life out of his body with her bare hands. Why did it have to be now? She whispered as she placed her forehead on her desk. Even though Naruto didn't hide the chemical components of his drugs and the Konoha scientists did in fact know what was contained in them, it all fell on the question of finding the ingredients. Naruto apparently had an unlimited supply of the spring country June flower, which was one of the rarest, most medicinal flowers on the planet. So much so that the people in spring were searching for the elusive flower. Naruto also apparently had a large source of the Suna crescent moon cactus that only appeared during a crescent moon in a remote part of the desert. The sap from the cactus could be refined through a rigorous process and turned into a soothing sort of cream that was able to stave off the killer heat of the desert and keep the person it was on relatively cool. It was the cream that Gaara, the current Kazekage, had ordered from the KDC branch warehouse in his country, and the cream that every decent ninja could afford and use on a mission. Plus the smell from the cream was fantastic. It wasn't the only thing the sap could be used for. It wasn't news to hear that Suna had allied with the KDC. The thing that got the Sanin scratching her head was that Naruto, apparently, had a substantial source of cave crawler lilies, which grew in wet and dark environment, mainly in Hidden Darkness and Kiriagakur. These flowers were the vital ingredients used in the cure for bullpox, a sort of pox that affected children under the ages of 12. It wasn't fatal, but it could be easily spread. This made it incredibly hard to contain, and this just so happened to be what was happening. Bullpox was like chicken pox. It can never occur twice, but it could seriously disfigure and stunt the child's growth if they weren't cured with the shot that contained these elusive cave-crawler lilies. The woman pulled out her pen from the desk and continued writing, throwing the pen away when it didn't work and retrieving a new one. She was writing a letter which would be copied into 5 more. They were to Konoha's allies. She was requesting for them to request for Rikuto 4,252 feet shots from the KDC branch warehouses in their countries, as well as add in a good word for Konoha. She didn't think that Naruto would just randomly shut down the business that was shooting him to the top of the financial world, not anymore. Tsunade Senju had to swallow her pride to even write the letter, but it would be best if the ninja of the next generation were not hunchbacked and droopy-eyed, or even the ones coming after that. If she played her cards right, who else is rolling their eyes? Then when she cured the bullpox of the afflicted children and immunized the rest, then the bullpox epidemic would be a thing of the past. The Sanin couldn't send her summon into the snake or spider clan realms because they had been barred from entering, as well as every other summon known to man. She vaguely suspected that those were where these elusive plants and animals were being grown and reared, but she couldn't prove it, nor was she entitled to demand knowledge of it from Naruto. Shizune. The door creaked open and the black-haired woman popped her head inside. Yes, Tsunade-sama. Call the rookie 9 and team guy. The woman left her teacher to her thoughts to go and assemble the teams she had called for. Naruto's general whereabouts were still greatly unknown, and Orochimaru had also disappeared off the map. Not even the location of the rogue samurai friend of Naruto location was known. This fact seemed to frustrate Jiraiya, since even his spy network were well in the dark of the boy's operations and movement. However the boy was traveling, he was doing a very good job of hiding his presence. But news of his accomplishments, as well as Aoki-chan's, weren't unfamiliar. He was now an S rank in over 5 hidden villages and nothing less than a rank in other villages, or countries. She had not yet raised his rank in the Konoha bingo books, but she had warned her ninja to approach with caution if he was ever sighted. No one knew just how much stronger he was now. Oh. Zetsu swallowed thickly as he looked down at the 2 Akatsuki membership rings, still connected to the fingers of the former owners, as he bubbled out of the ground. His multicolored eyes looked at the total carnage that was the grassy field the fight had occurred, as well as the twitching left foot of the very much still alive but incomplete immortal priest. He knew that the boy and his guard were strong, but he didn't think they were this strong. He made sure to keep constant tabs on how Naruto grew up and on his skills before he disappeared with Orochimaru, and he became confident that knowledge of this would give him, and the others in the Akatsuki, an edge if they were to ever face him. He even went as far as to think that the counters to them were much too easy. This was why he didn't bother to tell Kakazu and hidden on his discoveries. It was too late. He sighed as the air rippled in front of him on the other side of the fingers on the ground, and 3 other ninjas emerged. Toby silently clenched his fists but relaxed them a second later, mutely looking at Zetsu, then at the Kunoichi on his right, Conan, then finally at the stoic and pissed orange-haired man, Yahiko, before he said, "It seems we went about this all wrong." Conan nodded. "It seems so. I would have thought Kakazu would have gotten the job done alone." She looked at Zetsu, check if any of the blood around her is Naruto's. The plant creature nodded and shuffled around, poking the few small puddles of blood around. "It's obvious the brat isn't to be toyed with." Pain, Toby added as his lone eye looked up at the sky. They had been summoned to the location of the ring when a foreign source of chakra was channeled into the rings, which was what happens when a non-member touched them. Let it be known that it was very well near impossible for a non-member of the Akatsuki to touch the coveted membership ring only the top-rung members had. It was a distress signal. The puppet body for the Rinnegan holder grunted and looked around. The scorch marks, skid marks, blood puddles and few limp black threads on the former battleground signified that Naruto and his partner were indeed not to be trifled with. Zetsu stood up after tasting another shallow puddle and shook his head, meaning Naruto didn't shed any blood. Let's not forget that this is a 14-year-old boy we intend to capture. Being named a prodigy and being trained by a Sannin are not warning signs people of our caliber should fear. Toby wanted to yell in outrage. Kakazu might have not been the strongest member in their organization, but he was strong enough to stand out on his own, and Naruto had just wiped him off the face of the earth. The Sharingan user was certain that if he entered the playing field his abilities would be far from expected, but with what he was seeing he should still be cautious. Pain should at least increase the capture teams from teams of 2 to teams of 4. He kept his cool and said, "What's going to happen now?" Zetsu turned to look at him, formerly transfixed by a smoking skid mark on the ground, probably acid. "Zetsu, I want you to find the Kyubi Jinchuriki and document everything you know of him, every last detail. You told me that the boy had had his female samurai friend with him for over 3 years or so, so I would assume that he is close friends with her. She is his weak spot. The next teams going after him would target her just to distract him before you take him out." Zetsu wanted to say that Naruto wasn't exactly the most compassionate of people, that he wouldn't care what happened to Aoki-chan if they killed her, but he kept his mouth shut. He had a mission and he would accomplish it. As Toby, Conan and Pain teleported back to Am and Zetsu began the tedious task of tracking the spider summoner, we find Naruto, goggles hanging off his neck, many miles away, walking with his hands behind his head and idly kicking Hidden's head forward like a soccer ball. The mad priest was gurgling curses at him and Aoki busied herself by watching the softly swaying grass at their sides, slowly stroking the front of the hoodie she was wearing. The Ronin had been forced to take off her white short-sleeved midriff shirt because it had been soaked with the evil priest's blood, leaving her in her long-sleeved mesh armor and red and black sports bra. Naruto wasn't having any of it. He had given the girl his gray and red hoodie to wear. It was possibly the best feeling she had ever experienced. Her boss cherished her decency and had sacrificed his own hoodie for her to wear, rather than expose herself. As her right hand gripped the top of her sheathed katana, her left kept rubbing the hoodie's front. Naruto was busy thinking about the current situation between him and Konoha, as reported by Aoki-chan. The KDC was indeed an illegal organization that was taking the drug world by storm and that only a small handful of countries accepted his products. He wouldn't deny that it went into his head a little knowing that his organization was now depended on by these countries. The cash returns were always worth the risk of semi-openly associating with them. He drew the line on providing full services to countries and villages that were or antagonizing the KDC's operations, like Iwa and Darkness. He especially detested when strangers stuck their nose in his business despite being guilty of these accusations. Aoki-chan had reported that the Chill Branch warehouse laboratory had to be deserted after Jiraiya the Toad Sage had ambushed and defeated the 3 highly ranked ninjas he paid to protect the branch warehouse. He didn't blame the ninjas for failing in the duty, and he was especially relieved to hear that they had been smart enough to create fully powered water clones to pose as themselves while they helped evacuate the warehouse. Naruto believed that one would never know the value of something until it wasn't available anymore, and that was the message Aoki-chan had conveyed to the 2 open Konoha branch warehouses. All of the staff had been relocated to the newly opened branch warehouses close to Hidden Waterfall, Bear Country and Water Country. The new Water Country daimyo had been in open contact with Aoki-chan after the war in Kiri had ended and had pleaded with her to speak to her boss about opening a warehouse in his country to supply medicine to his people at his usual price. In exchange, he would help provide ninjas to protect the warehouses. The Ronin sympathized with the man, understanding his desperate position, and ordered for a warehouse to be built on a man-made island in the Water Country capital. The new Mizukage, appointed a few days after the construction had begun, also requested for her presence and thanked her for accepting the offer to build a branch warehouse in Water Country. Money wasn't in high circulation in the country, seeing as most of their resources had gone into the war, so Naruto had written that Aoki-chan slashed the prices of his products in half for only Water Country citizens until their economy picked up. The guards they got for the warehouse, in a way, helped pay for his products. Waterfall Village and Bear Country had similar stances. They looked away from what he did while at the same time extended both of their hands to buy his drugs. Business was business, and he didn't particularly care if he had to shut down a few warehouses in Earth and Lightning Country, after they had given him trouble, so that he could shuffle the workers through the extensive underground tunnel to these new warehouses. He was making his money all the same. Back to his issue with Konoha. Aoki-chan might have used her discretion to make orders concerning the KDC on his behalf, with his express permission, and he was proud of her initiative to shut down the 2 warehouses he had on the outskirts of Konoha and the 2 more he had in Fire Country. He could already sense the tension this single action had caused. The drugs they had ordered and stored could only last so long before the entire country would begin crying for the warehouses to reopen. Technically speaking, Fire Country was a regular customer of his products and contributed a fraction of the revenue used to power his business, but with the new warehouses opening, the profit would increase, plus he had money stored just in case anything bad happened. He would give Konoha a week to decide whether or not they, and by extension the whole country, really wanted his services. He also noted to himself to send messages to every warehouse on the continent to see to it that the drugs didn't reach Konoha. Now disregarding the thought of Konoha for a while, he began thinking about his business as a whole. The Kitsugumi Drug Company was now the world's leading drug company, albeit still very much illegal. It was still operated mainly in the underworld, but the fact that after he had been revealed to be the CEO and owner of the company, it had attracted scrutiny from other countries. People were willing to disregard the illegal things he sold to purchase the legal drugs, which were his highest sales currently. The scientist wouldn't claim to have created a better form of every drug on the planet, but he would claim to have formed a better drug for most of the planet's health afflictions, while still making sure that each drug was organic, have limited side effects and mostly non-addictive to his consumers. Naruto had reached the point that human experiments didn't matter to him for research anymore. He knew more than enough about the human body in various conditions from personal investigation and from his godmother's notes. If he was to experiment on a person again, it would mainly be for his sadistic pleasure, but he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't use humans in his experiments unless it was vital to his research. He went further to personally engineer better prosthetics and neck braces. He had written some notes on his breakthroughs and given a few of them to some of the resident doctors and physicians working in his branch warehouses so that they would at least know what they were selling. He planned to begin turning the KDC into a global franchise when half of the countries on the continent accepted the company. He already had a logo, which was mainly used as a means of identification by his workers. Ninja and samurai guards of each branch warehouse, the KDC had a good reputation in the criminal underworld. They had willing people, mostly from the underworld, who were applying to work for him, as well as more highly ranked ninjas applying for guard duty, probably because the ones that were already working as guards told their comrades about the benefits he gave them if and only if they provided quality services and remained loyal to him. He had over 3 dozen established branch warehouses scattered all over the continent that racked in millions of rue a week and transferred this profit back to him. The next foreseeable problem was that he didn't have a main warehouse laboratory to produce the drugs that were ordered in bulk by countries and in small measure by individuals. The main warehouse also served as a place where he could relax, receive the weekly supply of rue, send out the monthly supply of wages and concentrate on making even more breakthroughs in the field of medicine, and partly in the field of engineering. The stores of drugs in the branch warehouses might finish up in a week's time and the regular profit drop-off was in 3 days. He then decided that he would have to find a nice, secluded place to stay in. The 14-year-old boy had already accomplished many goals on his list of goals as well as his main goal. Merge a human with nature chakra and have both work in harmony, seeing as he was living proof that worked. This could also be applied to his success in the Mizuki beast. Another goal was create contact lenses to help people with toxic chakra-induced eye problems, which were quite a lot given the fact that tailed beast holders sometimes go wild, especially when they were inexperienced. The last, main, goals he could tick off his list was being able to use all 3 chakra types in his body, manifest more legs and partly join the snake and spider summons together, not necessarily in the same summoning realm. He needed a new direction before he went crazy and after 10 silent minutes of wondering he looked up into the sky, mildly surprised that it was midday. That was when it came to him. He beamed at his rogue samurai partner and best friend and the girl looked at him with an eyebrow raised in amusement, still subtly smelling the hoodie she was wearing. Yes, Naruto-sama. I just thought of the craziest thing. She waited to hear him out and he continued, what do you think of alternate universes, alternate dimensions? Oh. The white snake slowly uncoiled and slithered out of the cave he resided in inside the snake summoning realm. He beheld the rocky terrain he called his home that stretched far into the distance where it ended with a golden bridge made entirely out of seals and nature chakra connected the realm to the spider summoning realm. He could see snakes slither around idly, some speaking to spiders as they did, going about the daily functions. Accepting the foreign summons was one of the hardest things he had done, only doing so when Naruto had passed every single test he had placed before, including beating Manda, the snake boss in battle. At least now he wasn't against the idea of the spiders working with his snakes. Just then he felt a tremor so low that every other snake paused, most turning to him questionably. He narrowed his eyes and hastily slinked back into his cool cave, illuminated by a few flames on the walls. He stopped at the far end of the cave where a glass orb, held up by 3 gnarly sticks, glowed a sickly yellow, pulsating chakra every once in a while. The snake elder, a master of controlling his nature chakra, fought his way forward through the ever-increasing pulses of nature chakra coming off the orb that was so thick they were pushing him back. The ancient snake finally reached the orb and peered at it intently before a low, angry hiss escaped his scaly lips, his sparkling white scales darkened fractionally and his yellow reptilian eye slits narrowed dangerously. How dare he said quietly as he forced the nature chakra seeping from the orb back into its container. An image of a cloaked figure forcefully summoning snakes to tear through 2 unsuspecting sound ninjas. The old snake struggled for control as his temper flared, cracking a circle under him as chakra pushed out of his body. I never gave you permission. I never gave you permission to summon my children. He could sense a horde of snakes gathered at the mouth of his cave with a few spiders waiting there as well, but he was more concentrated on deciding what to do with the thief that stole the snake summoning ability. From what he was seeing, the person was incredibly skilled in using his newfound ability and in a tiny way it reminded him of Naruto, who also had multiple chakra signatures inside him, except he gave Naruto permission to summon his children. He finally reached a decision as he slithered to the multitude of hissing creatures at the front of his cave. They immediately kept quiet as he lifted his head high above them and they lowered theirs as a sign of respect. The white snake sage might have been 3 times bigger than an anaconda and maybe just as strong as one, but he was still considered the great white snake elder, from whom all of them came from, directly or indirectly. He looked at the spiders carefully and they too lowered their eyes away from his. He breathed in through his nose and said, "Our integrity as a summoning creatures have been breached by our late summoner's apprentice." A brave snake ventured a little forward to ask, "What are we going to do, Ji-sama?" The old, wizened snake looked away in shame. "We can do nothing for now. Kabuto had found a loophole in the summoning contract and used the residue of Orochimaru's essence left on him to add his name to the summoning contract. He could summon snakes and they would mindlessly obey him. His only option was to wait for the nature chakra in the boy to rebel and turn him to stone. Meanwhile, Naruto and Aoki were nearing the capital of Grass Country. The boy turned to the Ronin and asked, "Do you still play that blowing pipe?" He asked cautiously, and the corners of the girl's lips quirked upwards at his bashfulness. Blowing pipe. He suppressed his frustrated groan, aware that she was trying to get him to make a fool of himself. "You know, that silver thing you blow that makes music." He said the last word like it was a foreign object that he still couldn't study, and this was true. Naruto Uzumaki was a boy that knew of the most intimate secrets of the human body, animals and of nature, but he had no clue what music was. He was never interested enough in it to actually study it, until Aoki arrived and played her blowing pipe. The older fighter watched her boss make complicated movements with his fingers over his mouth and puff out his cheeks till they reddened. "You mean my flute?" He snapped his fingers and pointed at her. "Yes, that. Do you still play your flute?" It was like he was trying to learn another language with the way he was hesitantly, quietly and carefully pronouncing the name of the instrument. She nodded and removed the flute from inside her knee-high white but now blood-red socks. It was made out of shiny silver with graceful snow leopards carved onto it, each one dancing in place. "I still play my flute. Can you please play it?" he asked and propped his hands back onto the back of his head. "You mean I should play my blowing pipe?" she asked teasingly, and the boy rolled his vulpine eyes, shaded under his goggles. "This blowing pipe." She made exaggerated pointing gestures at the flute with her right hand, like it was a magic object. "This one." "Yes, that one," he said firmly and looked away slightly when she giggled into her hand. She stopped her laughs and lifted the instrument to her lips, took in a small breath and began playing a sweet song as the duo walked in a leisurely pace to their first adventure. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.